The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that felt sacred and suffocating all at once. Cameras clicked faintly in the back rows as the bailiff called, "All rise for Judge Evelyn Hart." The woman in the black robe stepped forward with calm authority, but inside, her heart thundered. The woman standing trial below, the once famous millionaire Eleanor Voss, looked up and froze. Her hand trembled. Her lips parted, but no words came. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. 27 years ago, that same woman had thrown her into the cold, black waters of Lake Crescent and walked away without a backward glance. Today, fate had brought her back, not as a victim, but as the judge. "Ms. Voss," Evelyn began, her tone razor-sharp but steady, "you stand accused of corporate fraud, obstruction of justice, and the attempted cover-up of multiple homicides related to your company's dumping scandal." Every flash of a camera captured their faces, one pale with guilt, the other burning with unspoken justice. Eleanor tried to speak. "Your Honor, Evelyn raised a hand. "You'll have your chance. But for now, you'll listen." The gavel struck once. The sound echoed like a gunshot. 27 years had turned a drowning infant into the very hand of justice. And as Evelyn sat back in her chair, her mind drifted. Not to the courtroom, but to the night it all began. The storm. The screams. The water. The betrayal. Because before she became Judge Evelyn Hart, she was nothing more than a nameless baby thrown away by a woman who thought money could erase sin. And tonight, she would finally finish the story that woman started. 27 years earlier, the world was cruelly different. It was 1998, a night drenched in rain and desperation, when Eleanor Voss made the decision that would haunt her forever. Eleanor was the queen of the city's skyline, the youngest self-made millionaire in the tech finance boom, adored by cameras, envied by competitors, and feared by employees. Behind her empire of steel and glass, however, was a secret she couldn't let the world see. She was pregnant, unmarried, and terrified that motherhood would ruin the empire she had clawed from nothing. She hid her pregnancy from everyone. The boardroom saw tailored blazers and practiced smiles. Only her personal assistant, a trembling young woman named Grace, knew the truth, and even she didn't know the depth of Eleanor's fear. When labor struck early one stormy night, Eleanor ordered Grace to drive her to her lakeside villa instead of a hospital. "No one can know," she hissed through the pain. "If the press finds out, I lose everything." Hours later, under flickering candlelight and thunder's roar, a baby girl came into the world, fragile, pink, crying into the shadows. Grace reached for a towel, whispering, "She's beautiful." But Eleanor didn't answer. Her face was pale, eyes hollow. She stared at the newborn like she was looking at a mirror she couldn't bear to face. "This child can't exist," she whispered finally. Grace froze. "Ma'am," Eleanor's voice cracked, equal parts fear and fury. "If anyone finds out, I'm finished. The investors will pull. The media will destroy me. I built everything with my own hands. I can't lose it." "Not for this." Outside, thunder rolled again, and something inside Eleanor snapped. She wrapped the crying infant in a white blanket embroidered with gold initials. EV. Then she stepped out into the storm. As Grace screamed behind her, Eleanor walked toward the lake, her shoes sinking into the mud, the reflection of lightning dancing across the water. The baby cried louder. Eleanor's hands trembled. Her breath hitched. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice barely audible beneath the rain. "You were never supposed to be born." And with one final tear-streaked breath, she let go. The splash disappeared. Into the wind. That was the night the empire stayed intact, but her soul shattered. Forever. The storm raged across Lake Crescent that night like nature. Itself was trying to reject what had just happened. Rain hammered the surface, waves churned, and the moon flickered through clouds like a dying eye. The infant's cry echoed for only seconds before the cold swallowed it. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Downstream, An old fisherman named Samuel Brant was closing his nets for the night. He lived alone in a shack by the dock, a quiet man who'd lost his wife years ago and found peace only in the rhythm of water and wind. As lightning split the sky, he thought he heard something, faint, fragile, like a bird caught in the reeds. He paused, listened again. There it was, a thin, desperate wail carried by the rain. "Dear God," Samuel whispered, grabbing his lantern and rushing toward the sound. His boots sank into the mud as the beam of light swept across the black lake, and then he saw it. A small white bundle floating, bobbing between waves. He didn't think. He dove in. The water was ice, slicing his lungs with every stroke. But he pushed through, arms burning, until his fingers brushed the edge of the soaked blanket. When he pulled it to shore, the baby inside let out another faint cry. Alive. Barely, but alive. Samuel fell to his knees, clutching her to his chest. "It's all right, little one," he rasped, wrapping her in his jacket. "You're safe now." He ran all the way back to his cabin, his breath fogging in the freezing air. Inside, he stoked the fire until the room glowed orange, stripping off the wet blanket. The child's tiny fingers curled around his thumb. She had a birthmark near her shoulder, a small, perfect shape like a crescent moon. Samuel stared at it for a long moment. "Guess you were meant for this lake, weren't you?" He whispered softly. He didn't know then, but that mark, the same crescent that matched Eleanor Voss's company logo, would one day become the key to everything. As the storm quieted, Samuel made a choice. He would raise her as his own. He named her Evelyn after the wife he'd lost. Miles away in her villa, Eleanor sat in silence by the window, still drenched, still trembling. The world outside was calm again, but her reflection in the glass was that of a woman forever haunted. She told herself it was over, that her past had sunk beneath the waves with no witnesses. But in the darkness of the lake, destiny had already taken root, in the arms of an old fisherman who refused to let innocence die. And one day, that child would rise from the depths, not to beg for love, but to deliver judgment. Samuel Brant wasn't a rich man, but his heart had more wealth than most. He raised Evelyn in a small lakeside cottage filled with the smell of wood smoke and the sound of seagulls tapping at the window each morning. To her, the lake wasn't the place she'd been abandoned. It was home. He never told her where she came from. All she knew was that she'd been found by the water on a stormy night. Samuel wanted to protect her from the cruelty that started her life. "Some truths," he used to say, "aren't meant for childhood." Evelyn grew fast, sharper than most kids, curious about everything. She'd follow Samuel out to the docks, learning how to untangle nets, patch boats, and read the wind. But what fascinated her most was how calm Samuel stayed through everything. When she once asked, "Grandpa, how do you stay strong when life's unfair?" he'd smiled softly. "Because life doesn't owe us fairness, sweetheart. It just gives us moments to prove who we are." He didn't know how true those words would become. When Evelyn was 12, a group of volunteers from a local church visited their village with donations and old clothes. One of the women gasped when she saw the embroidered blanket folded neatly on Evelyn's bed, the one Samuel had kept all those years. "This emblem," the woman whispered, tracing the gold initials stitched into the corner. "EV. That's from the Voss Foundation. The company that funds hospitals, orphanages, they're billionaires." Samuel froze. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I used to work for them. That embroidery, it's exclusive to their family." That night, Samuel sat by the fire long after Evelyn had gone to bed, the blanket on his lap. He finally understood what those initials meant, and what kind of person had abandoned a newborn. From that day, his love for Evelyn deepened into something protective, almost fierce. He vowed never to let that cruel world touch her again. But fate doesn't honor promises. When Samuel fell ill years later, Evelyn had to leave the lake for the first time to study. The city was vast, cold, full of ambition, the very world her mother ruled. And while Evelyn didn't yet know it, her instincts, her drive, her hunger for justice were inherited straight from the woman who'd tried to erase her. Each time she stared into a courtroom on TV, she felt something burning in her, a calling. She didn't just want to live. She wanted to make things right. And destiny, patient and silent, was leading her back to where her story began, to the woman who thought she was gone forever. Years passed, and Evelyn grew into the kind of woman who made people listen when she spoke, calm, articulate, sharp as glass. She earned scholarships, excelled in debate, and studied law not for prestige, but because somewhere deep inside her, she needed to understand justice. Samuel's health, though, began to fade. The once strong fisherman grew weaker, his hands trembling when he tried to mend his nets. Evelyn balanced classes with caring for him, staying up late reading law books by the fire while his raspy breathing echoed behind her. One winter evening, as the snow fell against the window pane, Samuel called her over. His voice was thin, each word a fight. "Evelyn, there's something you should know before I go." She took his hand. "Don't say that," but he smiled gently. "You deserve the truth." He nodded toward the small chest by his bed. Inside, wrapped in an old scarf, was the white baby blanket, the one with the gold embroidery she'd never questioned. Her heart skipped. "Where did you get this?" Samuel's eyes filled with tears. "The night I found you? You were floating in the lake, wrapped in that?" She froze, her breath catching. "Found me? What are you saying?" "I didn't want to burden you," he whispered. "You weren't mine by blood, but you became my whole world." That blanket. It belonged to someone powerful. A woman named Eleanor Voss. The name hit her like thunder. She'd heard it before, in lectures, on the news, printed on corporate buildings downtown. Voss Technologies, one of the richest and most ruthless companies in the country. Evelyn stared at the gold initials, EV, her own initials. Samuel's voice trembled. "I think she tried to get rid of you, and fate just refused to let her." Tears blurred her vision. The world she'd built, the story she'd told herself, shattered in a heartbeat. After Samuel's funeral weeks later, Evelyn sat alone on the dock, the lake calm beneath a gray sky. In her lap lay the blanket, her name stitched in gold like a cruel joke. She whispered to the wind, "You wanted me gone, but I'm still here." That was the breaking point, the moment she stopped running from her past and started walking toward it. She didn't just want to live anymore. She wanted justice, the kind that didn't just punish, but revealed. The city skyline glowed gold against the dusk when Evelyn stepped off the train, clutching the single suitcase Samuel had left her. She was 21, broke, and grieving, but her eyes burned with purpose. She enrolled in law school on scholarship, throwing herself into her studies like a soldier preparing for war. She never told anyone her true motive. To her professors, she was the quiet overachiever. To herself, she was building a weapon, the law. Every late-night lecture, every courtroom visit, every case file she devoured was a step closer to understanding how monsters like Eleanor Voss stayed untouchable. Years passed. Evelyn graduated top of her class, earned clerkships under prestigious judges, and quickly gained a reputation for being fearless, a woman who could find truth where others saw smoke. But behind her calm professionalism was an obsession she couldn't quiet. She followed Eleanor Voss from a distance, news articles, business reports, annual charity galas. The woman's empire had only grown, global expansion, political ties, billions in revenue. But beneath the glittering surface, Evelyn saw cracks. Labor lawsuits dismissed, environmental violations lost in paperwork, whistleblowers silenced. And then, one night, everything changed. Evelyn attended a private gala hosted by the Voss Foundation under her new title as Assistant District Attorney. Eleanor stood at the center of the ballroom, graceful and radiant, shaking hands with senators, smiling for cameras. Evelyn froze when she saw her. That face, perfectly preserved, confident, heartless, was the same one that haunted her dreams. As Eleanor passed by, their eyes met for the first time. The older woman smiled politely, unaware. "You look familiar, young lady," she said lightly. Evelyn returned the smile, voice calm. "Maybe in another life." The words hung in the air like an omen. That night, Evelyn requested every file linked to Voss Industries. The environmental cover-ups, the offshore accounts, the accidental disappearances of workers. She pieced it all together like the case she'd been born to try. And as she stared at the growing pile of evidence on her desk, she whispered to the empty office, "You threw me into the water to drown, Eleanor, but I learned how to swim." It was no longer just about revenge. It was about exposing the disease of greed that infected everything her mother touched. The scales of justice were tipping, and this time, they were tipping her way. The investigation into Voss Industries started quietly. A few late nights, sealed subpoenas, whispers behind glass doors, but within months, it became the biggest corruption case the city had seen in decades. And at the heart of it stood Evelyn Hart, the girl once left for dead, now the prosecutor nobody dared to cross. The deeper she dug, the uglier it got. Environmental crimes, tax fraud, bribery, and something darker. The company had been secretly dumping toxic waste near the very lake where she'd been abandoned as a baby. It wasn't just pollution. It was a graveyard of cover-ups. When Evelyn found the internal memo approving the dumping, signed personally by Eleanor Voss, her pulse stopped. It was dated only a year after the night she was born. The woman hadn't just thrown her away, she'd turned the same lake into a landfill of greed. "This isn't business," Evelyn whispered to herself. "It's blasphemy." She compiled everything, evidence, witnesses, leaked documents. Every thread led back to Eleanor's personal authorization. But Eleanor was smart. Her lawyers were sharks. Each time Evelyn's team made progress, paperwork disappeared, witnesses changed stories, and her leads went cold. Then, one morning, Evelyn arrived at her office to find an envelope on her desk. No sender. Inside was a single sheet, a photo of her as a baby, wrapped in a white blanket with gold initials EV, half soaked in lake water, her blood turned to ice. Only one person could have known. Beneath the photo was a handwritten note. "Stop digging, or I'll remind the world where you came from." For the first time, Evelyn's mask cracked. Someone had uncovered her secret, the connection between her and Eleanor. If the public found out, the case could be thrown out for conflict of interest. That night, she drove back to Lake Crescent, the place she swore she'd never return. The moonlight shimmered across the water's surface, eerily calm. She stood at the shore, clutching the photo, hearing Samuel's voice in her mind. "Life doesn't owe us fairness. It gives us moments to prove who we are." Her tears fell into the same water that had nearly claimed her life. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she whispered to the wind. "You tried to erase me, but I'm the proof you failed." The next morning, Evelyn filed a motion that shocked the entire city. She recused herself as prosecutor, but recommended an independent investigation into Voss Industries and its CEO. It was a masterstroke. By stepping back, she protected the integrity of the case while letting the evidence speak for itself. 3 weeks later, the federal indictments came through. Eleanor Voss was charged with fraud, obstruction, and reckless endangerment. The empire she built began collapsing overnight. Board members resigning, stock plummeting. Journalists circling like vultures. As Eleanor's name dominated the headlines, she finally realized who had started the avalanche. A photograph leaked to the press. Evelyn standing beside the Attorney General, expression cold and composed. Eleanor stared at the screen, whispering to herself, "No, it can't be. That face." For the first time in her life, she felt the same chill she once gave others. Her past wasn't just catching up. It was standing in judgment. The morning the indictments hit, the city woke up to a different kind of sunrise, one that painted glass towers gold, as if mocking the empire that had just fallen. Eleanor Voss's face was on every screen. The headlines were merciless. Tech tycoon Millionaire Voss indicted on federal charges. Former CEO faces up to 30 years in prison. The fall of a self-made queen. In her penthouse, Eleanor sat alone among silent chandeliers and cold marble. The empire she'd built with her bare hands, the pride, the power, the illusion of control, was gone. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, but she didn't answer. Every call was another investor, another betrayal, another nail in her golden coffin. On the news, a press conference played. At the podium stood Evelyn Hart, now appointed as an interim federal judge. She spoke calmly with the same poise Eleanor once used when commanding rooms full of men twice her age. "No person," Evelyn said, "no matter how powerful, stands above the law. Justice delayed is not justice denied, only postponed until the truth finds its voice." The crowd erupted in applause. Eleanor muted the television, her reflection staring back at her through the glass screen. Something in Evelyn's tone, the cadence, the defiant strength, gnawed at her. She'd heard it before. In her own youth, in her own voice. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the stormy night by the lake, the crying baby, the white blanket, the gold-stitched initials EV no. It couldn't be. But the resemblance was undeniable. The eyes, the jawline, the fire. It all connected like a puzzle. She'd spent decades avoiding. Her hand trembled as she opened her laptop and searched Evelyn Hart's background. Orphan. Raised by a fisherman named Samuel Brandt. Born. The same week Eleanor's private retreat. Had been reported to police for a disturbance near Lake Crescent. Her breath caught in her throat. The blood drained from her face. She whispered the words like a confession to no one. "My daughter." In that moment, the billionaire who once believed she controlled fate realized fate had written her a perfect punishment. The world she'd built on lies was collapsing, and the only person who could save her, the one person she'd betrayed most, was now the one person who could condemn her. Eleanor didn't show up for her first hearing. By noon, agents arrived at her penthouse with a warrant. The marble floors that once gleamed under designer heels were now covered with scattered documents, open safes, and half-packed suitcases. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Voss looked small. She didn't fight the arrest. She didn't even look at the agents when they read her rights. Her mind was elsewhere, spiraling through memories of the night at Lake Crescent, the cries she tried to forget, and the name that now haunted her, Evelyn Hart. At the federal building, investigators began piecing together the web of deceit she'd spun for decades. Offshore accounts, dummy corporations, payments to silence whistleblowers, and tucked in a private safe, an old photo, a much younger, Eleanor holding a newborn wrapped in a white blanket with gold initials. The same blanket now sealed in evidence under Evelyn's name. The discovery hit the press immediately. Headlines turned from scandal to tragedy. Federal investigation reveals secret past. Millionaire tied to orphaned judge. The Lake Crescent baby case reopens after 27 years. By evening, the courtroom was overflowing. Cameras lined every inch of marble flooring. This wasn't just a corruption trial anymore. It was poetic justice unfolding in real time. Evelyn sat at the bench, face unreadable, gavel in hand. She'd been assigned the case by pure procedural coincidence, or maybe, as she told herself quietly, divine irony. When Eleanor entered in handcuffs, her eyes met Evelyn's, and both women froze. The resemblance was undeniable now, not just in their features but in their fire. Evelyn's voice was steady. "Ms. Voss, you stand accused of corporate crimes, obstruction, and attempted homicide in connection with the Lake Crescent incident." Eleanor's lips trembled. "Judge Hart. Evelyn." Evelyn's gaze hardened. "Address the court properly, Ms. Voss." "I'm your mother," Eleanor whispered, barely audible. The words rippled through the courtroom like a gunshot. Gasps echoed. Reporters scrambled for quotes. Evelyn didn't flinch. She simply said, "The law doesn't recognize titles of the heart, only truth." Behind her calm eyes, chaos swirled, years of pain, questions, and what-ifs crashing together. But she refused to let emotion undo what destiny had written. The evidence spoke for itself: recordings, signatures, witness statements, the blanket and the DNA test confirming the unthinkable. As the room erupted into murmurs, Evelyn struck her gavel once, silencing it all. "This court," she said, voice clear and cold, "will proceed, without bias, without pity, and without forgetting what justice means." And in that moment, both women, the one who gave life and the one who reclaimed it, realized this wasn't a trial anymore. It was a reckoning 27 years in the making. The world watched. Every major network aired the trial live, not for the corporate crimes, but for the story that gripped every heart in the nation: a daughter judging the mother who once tried to end her life. Eleanor Voss sat at the defense table, her hair silvered, her power gone. The same woman who once commanded empires now stared at the oak paneling like it could swallow her. Across the room, Judge Evelyn Hart held her composure with the grace of someone who'd been tempered by pain. The prosecutor began. "Your Honor, the evidence before this court proves not only fraud and corruption, but a personal act of attempted murder 27 years ago." Gasps filled the room. Eleanor's lawyer rose immediately. "Objection." Irrelevant to the corporate case, Evelyn's gavel cracked the air. "Overruled. Continue." The prosecutor displayed a photo on the projector, the embroidered baby blanket, gold thread catching the light. This item was found in the defendant's private vault, the same blanket recovered with the infant abandoned at Lake Crescent. DNA testing confirms. He paused, letting the weight of the words land. "The infant is now Judge Evelyn Hart." The room fell silent. Even the press stopped whispering. Eleanor's eyes flooded, her voice trembling as she rose. Please let me explain. I was young, terrified. I thought I was protecting myself. I didn't know she lived. God, I didn't know." Evelyn didn't move. Her hands were still, the robe heavy on her shoulders. "Sit down, Miss Voss. This is not your stage." Tears streaked down Eleanor's face. "You have to understand, Evelyn." The gavel slammed again. "Address the court properly." The command cracked through the air, her tone colder than winter. The prosecutor continued. "Your Honor, the defendant's choices were deliberate. She falsified hospital records, paid off witnesses, and used her company to conceal crimes. Her empire is built on suffering. And now the law demands restitution." Eleanor's lawyer tried to salvage dignity. "Your Honor, my client is remorseful. She's an elderly woman with failing health." Evelyn's gaze cut him off. "So were the families poisoned by her factories. So were the workers she underpaid. Compassion is not immunity." A ripple of applause threatened to erupt, but was quickly silenced by a glance from the bailiff. Finally, Eleanor stood again, defying the court's decorum, her voice breaking. "Do you hate me that much?" she cried. "You have my face, you have my strength, I see myself in you." Evelyn looked down at her, not with anger, but something far heavier. "You see power, Ms. Voss. But what you don't see is mercy. That's something you never learned." A hush fell over the courtroom. Evelyn took a slow breath, then delivered the final blow. "This court finds the defendant, Eleanor Voss, guilty on all counts: fraud, obstruction, and endangerment. Sentence: 20 years imprisonment, without parole for the first 10. Eleanor's knees buckled. The gavel came down one last time, sealing her fate. As the bailiffs approached, she whispered, "Evelyn, I named you after myself. Eleanor Voss, E.V. It's your initials, too." Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second. The truth, cruel and poetic, stung deeper than any insult. Then she whispered back, so only her mother could hear. "You gave me your name, but I made my own." The courtroom erupted in camera flashes and gasps as Eleanor was led away. The empire builder turned prisoner, and the abandoned girl turned judge. And for the first time, the lake that once tried to drown her felt very far behind. The courtroom emptied slowly that evening, reporters shouting questions into microphones, lights flashing like lightning. But Evelyn stayed seated behind the bench, staring at the empty chair where her mother had just sat. The hum of the crowd faded into silence until it was just her, the gavel, the echo, and 27 years of ghosts. She removed her robe and stepped into the holding corridor. The guards hesitated when they saw her. "Your Honor," one said quietly, "she asked to see you. 1 minute only." Evelyn nodded. The holding cell was dim, the smell of metal and bleach heavy in the air. Eleanor sat on the bench, wrists cuffed, eyes hollow. When she saw Evelyn, she stood, voice trembling. "I deserved this, every bit of it, but I just need to know, why didn't you walk away? You could have recused yourself. You could have let someone else judge me." Evelyn's tone was steady but soft. "Because justice doesn't get to walk away, Ms. Voss. It has to face what was done, even if it bleeds to do it." Eleanor's shoulders shook. "You sound like me when I was young. I built everything with fire in my veins. But I burned everyone who came too close." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "You didn't build an empire, Eleanor. You built a cage. You trapped yourself in it the moment you thought a secret was worth more than a life." Eleanor stepped forward until the bars separated them by inches. "I can't undo what I did. But I see you now and I'm proud, even if I don't deserve to be." For the first time, Evelyn didn't correct her. She just stood there, studying the face that mirrored her own, older, cracked, defeated. "Do you forgive me?" Eleanor whispered. Evelyn took a long breath. "Forgiveness isn't something I can give for the child you left behind, but I can stop hating you for the woman who finally confessed." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "That's more mercy than I ever earned." Evelyn turned to leave but paused at the door. Without looking back, she said quietly, "When you see the lake again, and you will, I hope you finally understand what it means to let go." As the guard closed the door behind her, Eleanor sank to her knees, the first sob escaping her chest, not from fear, but from release. Outside, Evelyn walked into the cold evening air. The city lights shimmered against the clouds, reflected faintly in a fountain nearby, water rippling like the lake that had once swallowed her cries. This time she didn't see darkness in it. She saw closure. 6 months later, the city had moved on. The headlines faded, the trial recordings archived. But for Evelyn Hart, peace wasn't something written in the news. It was something quietly rebuilt, one sunrise at a time. She left the bench for a while, trading the marble and echo of the courtroom for a small cottage by Lake Crescent. The same water that once carried her away now reflected the golden dawn, still and forgiving. Every morning she sat on the dock with coffee in hand, feeling the mist on her face. For the first time in her life, she wasn't chasing justice or revenge. She was just living. One afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting was shaky, the paper worn. It came from the Women's Correctional Facility. The return address read, Eleanor Voss. Evelyn hesitated before opening it. Inside were only a few lines written with surprising humility. "You taught me what power was supposed to be. Not control, but accountability. I don't ask for forgiveness. Only that when I see the sky, from my cell window, I imagine it's the same one you see from the lake. Maybe that's our peace. E." Evelyn folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. She didn't cry. She just exhaled, long, steady, final. Later that evening, she walked to the edge of the lake. The water rippled gently against the shore, carrying the scent of pine and rain. She knelt, touched the surface, and whispered, "It's over." The wind stirred her hair, like the world itself had heard her. Behind her, the horizon glowed with soft amber light. For the first time, she didn't see the lake as a grave of her past, but as proof of her survival. She had been thrown away by fear, raised by love, and forged by truth. And now, as she stood beneath the same sky that her mother saw from behind bars, she finally understood mercy, not as surrender, but as freedom. She smiled faintly and turned back toward the cottage, whispering one last promise to the man who'd saved her all those years ago. "You were right, Samuel. Life doesn't owe us fairness, but it gave me the moment to prove who I am." The sun dipped low, the water shimmered gold, and for the first time since the storm, there was peace.